Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this edition of the Rose and Rubini podcast, Making Sense of This World. My name is Manas Chavla, and as always, I'm joined by CEO and Head of Research, Brunello Rosa. Lots going on in the world this week, but this week we're talking about the policy inconsistencies and how they'll continue to buffet financial markets. Brunello, the last the October-November round of all the major central bank meetings have just come to an end, and we've been analyzing those. So we want to look at all the sort of major meetings and the consequences of that, and maybe perhaps figure out a golden thread that ties these three. But let's start at the Federal Reserve. What did the Federal Reserve's meeting conclude with?
So the Federal Reserve continuing its tightening of monetary policy, increased interest rates by 75 basis points again, and they are now going towards a very restrictive side of monetary policy, above neutral. And what the market was exposed was kind of mixed signals. On the one hand, the Fed said we are actually getting closer to the terminal rate, so the rate that we want to achieve in order to keep inflation low or lower. And that means that over time we can afford to reduce the speed of increase of those interest rates. That was kind of a dovish signal, but then there was a hawkish signal by which the Federal Reserve said that unfortunately we might need to increase rates further and kind of higher than previously anticipated, because inflation is proving more persistent than we initially thought. So the market was exposed to these kind of signals, dovish and hawkish signals, so it zigzagged, seesawed, until somehow concluded that the overall message was somehow hawkish. In our opinion, instead, the market should kind of get the sense that inflation has peaked. The central bank is actually getting closer to finishing its tightening phase, and therefore they may afford to stay at the higher level that they've just indicated for quite some time, potentially cutting rates at some point in 2023. But clearly the market gets more scared by the fact that the Federal Reserve is constantly increasing the end point of this tightening cycle. They've been doing so for the last few months, and they fear that after this one, there might be another one, and therefore that's why every time there's the signal that they might be going higher than previously expected, another time might happen again. So the market got these mixed signals and reacted accordingly.
Right, and if we look across the pond to the Bank of England, I mean, our listeners will remember the whole Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng mini budget debacle. Markets have been unsettled since then. Rishi Sunak should have calmed them down somewhat. Still, a real test needs to be seen. Should we? Yeah. Let me start on the top of the question. That's fine. Yeah, I'll start at the top of the question.
From the Bank of England.
Yeah. Interesting. And I want to look across the pond now to the Bank of England, because our listeners will remember just, it wasn't too long ago when the Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng mini budget debacle happened, and markets are really unsettled. They've sort of Rishi Sunak and his sort of more prudent financial authority has calmed markets a little bit. There's still a big test that remains to be seen from the Bank of England. And you said the BOV is also providing mixed signals to the market. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so we all remember how disastrous was the mini budget and the reaction of the market and the LDI saga and the Bank of England that had to intervene in haste just to effectively bail out the entire private pension system in the UK. And this is because what we call an economic gamble, effectively reckless fiscal policies were announced. Now, everything has changed since then. The Chancellor has changed, the Prime Minister has changed, and the policies have in fact changed. Now we are waiting for the budget to be announced, and this will happen on the week starting on the 14th of November. And and therefore the Bank of England had to take stock of all these announcements about fiscal policy. So they have increased rates much further than before, so by 75 basis points, hasn't happened for a very, very long time. And so more than the 50 basis points they've been doing so far. But at the same time, they also released, since it was November, the updated forecasts for growth and inflation, and they said that actually the recession is going to be definitely longer than previously expected. Before it was like 5 quarters, now we're talking almost 2 full years of recession, so very prolonged, quite as deep as before. But this is the beginning. We don't know how deep it will be. It might be in fact more severe than currently expected. Definitely the fact that the Bank of England expects 2 weeks of contraction is kind of a how can I say, is a very strong signal that they are sending, which tends to mean that eventually they might need to ease policy. So while they're increasing interest rates, they signal that down the line there might be the need to ease monetary policy, the monetary policy stance. So again, the market buffeted between these mixed signals from the central bank.
And then there's also within that the sort of more subtle inconsistency, the potential conflict between price stability and financial stability. And almost all the banks around the world, apart from maybe the Bank of Japan, which tends to be an outlier to so many things, almost all the banks around the world are fighting inflation to restore price stability, but they're doing that with a combination of higher policy rates and balance sheet policies, forward guidance. The ECB plays a really interesting role there. What did the ECB's bank meetings tell you?
Yeah, so let's start from the example and let's try to get some kind of theoretical principle out of that. So the example is that the ECB is increasing interest rates like every major central bank, as you said, apart from the Bank of Japan, but they actually continue to reinvest in full the proceeds of maturing bonds of their bond purchase portfolio. And this continues to provide some form of accommodation to the market, while on the other side, they are increasing interest rates. How they justify that? Well, they are saying that interest rates for inflation and bond purchases are kept for the transmission mechanism of monetary policy. So effectively, they are saying that in order to make sure that monetary policy is transmitted smoothly across all jurisdictions of the euro area, they reserve the right, first of all, of altering the weights of their purchases, and secondly, activating what they call TPI, the transmission protection instrument, which effectively allows the central bank to buy selective bonds of a specific jurisdictions. So that's what the ECB is doing. The principle that it seems to be emerging from those lessons is that central bankers are now doing what they said years ago that was kind of impossible to do, which is using the two instruments separately, interest rates and QE. When it was first launched, QE in 2008, the idea was that having reached the zero lower bound on interest rates, in order to provide further accommodation, they needed to lower the long end of the yield curve, and this was due by purchasing bonds. And the fact that they were purchasing bonds was also a signal that those rates increases would not happen for some time. So the signaling power of QE was very strong and considered to be one of the major channels for the effectiveness of the policy. Now they are kind of doing the opposite. They are saying, we can use short-term interest rates to control for inflation, and long-term, so the purchase of long-term bonds is only devoted for either the smooth transition of monetary policy or financial stability considerations, as it was the case of the LDI debacle in the UK. So again, think about the signals that the market receives. On the one hand, the central bank is increasing interest rates, so its monetary policy is becoming tighter. On the other hand, they might be purchasing bonds to avoid financial instability episodes, and that's a way of easing financial conditions. So again, mixed signals, given the tension between these two goals for monetary policy. Not an easy, admittedly, not an easy situation for central bankers to be in. Equally, not an easy situation for markets to be in, because they need to detect those signals and act kind of accordingly.
Right. I mean, we've spoken about two levels then of policy inconsistency, and it seems like from what you're saying in all these sort of central banks, not only are they there right now, but the market conditions and circumstances are such that they'll likely be baked in for a while to come. And markets and, both the central bankers will be tackling that problem. So definitely one to watch. As always, Brunello, thank you so much for advice and insight.
Thank you very much. Until next time.